Okay, this is from the book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, P. Rogers, going in alphabetical order. We're on letter H, Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton, he's one of the founding fathers, and he was a good guy. You know, he was a great aide to GW when they had their successful victories over the British. And he was very smart and clever and organized, and he was known as being a genius. Here's a quote by him. He says, "All the genius I have lies in this. When I have a subject at hand, I study it profoundly." And so he did great. He said, "We love our families more than our neighbors." That's normal. We love our neighbors more than our countrymen in general. That's normal. Self-preservation is the first principle of all our nature. All societies have always felt their own group was better than other groups. And that's a normal thing. You need to like your own group in order to protect it and to maintain it. Okay, now there are some bad things about Alexander Hamilton. The big thing about him that was bad was after the victory in 1776 conflict, he then sort of went towards, there was sort of a separation of how things were going to run. One group, especially sort of the northern eastern group, pushed for having things run like Britain, like having a king and a parliament, maybe lords and commons. And Alexander Hamilton was of that ilk, all right? And then there was another ilk that was more like along the lines of Thomas Jefferson, who wanted America to especially be, small family farms, which would have been a much better America. There's always going to be the big cities, but there's not always going to be the family farms. The family farms have now been largely destroyed, and the country would be much better off if they had been maintained. So even though there's always a lot of back and forth in politics, I think Alexander Hamilton was on the bad side at this time. And okay, we'll leave it at that. Edith Hamilton. Now, she's the great scholar and great American scholar of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, and they loved her so much in Greece, they gave her, made her an honorary citizen of Athens, okay, and in Greece. Okay, here's just an anonymous quote. Romulus killed Remus and named the city after himself. Okay, now here's Edith Hamilton. "The ancient world, insofar as we can reconstruct it, bears everywhere the same stamp. In Egypt, in Crete, in Mesopotamia, a despot enthroned, whose whims are the determining factor, a wretched, subjugated populace, a great priestly organization to which is handed over the domain of the intellect. That is what we know of the Oriental state today." Okay? And that's actually true. Most countries, since the beginning of time, there's been some tyrant thug who runs the place, and he just beats the crap out of anybody who disagrees with him about anything. Okay? And he doesn't allow any progress. Like I said, 1,000 years could go by in Egypt and there would be no progress in the arts. Okay? This is the same old crappy hieroglyphics crap. And she has a great quote here. She says, "When you think of Egypt, you think of a tomb, a grave, the pyramids. When you think of Greece, you immediately think of a theater. And one comes to mind as naturally as the other." Yeah, that's a great point. She said the Greeks were the first Westerners. Western culture comes from ancient Greece. It comes from ancient Greek. What's good of it? Much more than people realize. Yes, it also comes from the Old Testament of the Bible, but I would say I've studied a lot about the Old Testament. I've studied a lot of commentary, and I can tell you the disagreements on the Old Testament are so strong. They're 180 degrees on multiple different subjects. The Old Testament is much less well understood by the public than is widely realized. Okay, versus the ancient Greeks are pretty well understood. You just have to read what's been written about them. It's pretty well known. And there's much more stuff you're going to want to learn about from the ancient Greeks and from the Old Testament. All right? Okay, well, anyways, what else does she have to say? She says, yeah, the Oriental state today. Look at the Oriental state. Most of those places are still crap holes. They're still collectivist, tyrannical. You got a flat land territory. A thug just controls, millions or even billions of people. Nothing interesting or original comes out of those places. Yeah, they got a lot of high IQs. A lot of Asians got high IQs, but without Christian culture, they don't do much in literature and painting and sculpture. It's almost nothing comes out of those places because the tyrant doesn't allow variety of opinion or free speech. And also what I've seen happen when I read about some of the early inventions in places like China, as soon as somebody does something good, invents something, the ruler steals it away from them. So people are like, well, why should we bother trying to invent anything? It's just going to be taken. So property was not secure. And that's why most of what is good comes out of Europe, because they had a lot more compared to other places, freedom of speech and freedom of property, freedom of thought. So a guy could invent something and make a little money from it, okay? and the inventor should get some money from it. Okay. Um, Edith Hamilton continues. Ancient Rome pointed back to the old world, to the Easterners, where emperors were gods, and they controlled a brutalized people, full of horrors, as the dearest form of amusement. Yeah, the Romans were sick to a large extent, especially Nero, scumbag. He would burn the Christians as torches to light the streets at night. He's the one who burned down a whole bunch of the city. And then he just wanted to use that for his future building projects. Just like, some people recently burned down, Hawaii, okay, or burned down a lot of forest. And then they just say, oh, it was a natural disaster. Maybe those Christians did it, okay. Let's see, what else does he say? Athens and Rome had little in common. That which distinguishes the modern world from the ancient, and that which divides the West from the East, is the supremacy of the mind in the affairs of men. And this came to birth in Greece, and lived in Greece alone out of all the ancient world. The Greeks were the first intellectualists and the first Westerners. Yeah, the first group that had free speech on a large scale. And that's why almost everything, like Will Durant said, almost everything comes from ancient Greece except, the modern machines. They invented philosophy, significant painting, art, sculpture, theater, mathematics. There were other places that had some good mathematics, so that wasn't just ancient Greece, but ancient Greeks, they're like great at everything. Archimedes. Again, I said it before and I'll say it again. For a young person, if you want to be educated, you should definitely put some time into learning the ancient Greeks. They're a lot of fun to learn. They're one of the most fun things to study. Okay, Edith Hamilton continues. The spirit of the West, the modern spirit, is a Greek discovery. The Greeks were the first Westerners. And that's another thing I would say, too, is you get a sense of joy. Like, kids come out of grade school and high school saying school sucks. They never read another book in their life. And even college, too, is that same disconnected information, memorize this for the test. When you study the ancient Greeks, it's beautiful. You say, oh, I understand what they're thinking. I see how this metaphor relates to this and this, these experiences in my personal life. It's information you take to your heart. That's why when, the communists wanted to ruin education in the United States, they said we have to get rid of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans because this stuff is foundational to human behavior, the human mind. The Greeks is mostly good stuff. The Romans are mostly bad stuff. But there's some good stuff coming out of the Romans too. Okay, Edith Hamilton continues. To rejoice in life, to find the world beautiful, that was a mark of the Greek spirit, which distinguished it from all that had gone before. The Greeks said, all things are called in to be examined and brought into question. There are no limits to be set on thought. The Greeks were the first people who played. They had Olympic games and theater. The Romans did not play. The gladiator fights were not played. They were brutal and sadistic, and the loser was often killed. That's not playing. Edith Hamilton continues, responsibility is the price for every man that he must pay for freedom. Okay, yeah, I don't think freedom is going to come back to these European countries unless they make a bigger effort because, they're already pretty far down the path of being brought back into third world slavery. Edith Hamilton continues, a people's literature is a great textbook for a real knowledge of them. The writings of the day show the quality of the people as no historical reconstruction can. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why Edith Hamilton is a great historian, because she would write history a lot of times from a biographical point of view. And that's the way you learn it best, because you remember the individual history. If you want to learn Rome, study Cicero. If you want to learn the ancient Greeks, study Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, Pericles, Archimedes. Okay, there's a lot of great ones to study. The playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes. It's all great stuff. Edith Hamilton. Myths are early science, the result of men's first trying to explain what they saw around them. Okay, that's it for today. That's part one of the Edith Hamilton. Hope you found that helpful.